So, another edition of Untold London, and I'm going to take you for a little walk down Kingley Street. Kingley Street's lovely. It was actually, Kingley Street's where the UK's first South Korean restaurant was ever set up, a place called Myung-gai, and it's right down the bottom, and that was set up in the 1960s. But the reason I'm taking you down Kingley Street is because it was the scene of an incident which concerned one of my absolute heroes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a man called Duncan Webb. Now, Duncan Webb was known as the king of crime reporters in the 50s. He worked for the Sunday People newspaper. He was born in London, and he never set out to be a journalist. He left school when he was 14, and he got a job at the Evening Standard for Lord Beaverbrook as something called a copy boy. Now, copy boy back in the day, what would happen is the journalists would sit there typing away, and cling, once they'd finished their piece, they'd pull it out the typewriter and they stick it in a tray and they shout out, "Copy boy!" And the copy boys would run along, and they literally, their job was to pick up the journalist's copy and take it down to the compositors, where after the editor had written all over it, the compositors would, you know, lay out the print and the text. So that was what his job was. Anyway, he's on the way to work, his first day at work at the Evening Standard, and he's on the tube, and he hears a woman talking about how she's been violently mugged. So he's like, "Oh, that sounds like a story." So Duncan interviews this lady on his way to work, arrives as a 14-year-old and says, "I am a copy boy, but guys, I've got a great story for you." And it went into the Evening Standard that afternoon. And that's what set old Duncan Webb off to be a crime reporter. Now, in Kingley Street, there was a brothel at number 6, run by a gang of brothers called the Messina brothers. Now, the Messina brothers were from Malta and from Egypt. They moved to London in the 1920s. There were 5 of them, and they used to traffic people. They used to bring vulnerable women over from Europe and keep them in brothels. Now, Duncan knew this was going on, and Duncan wanted to make sure that they were nicked and this prostitution ring was closed down. Now, the police weren't going to do anything about it. The vice squad back then, there'd be brown envelopes passed over, etc. So the police weren't particularly interested in closing down this huge ring. They had 30 brothels in central London, a big money operation. So what Duncan did was, at number 6 here, he waited outside for women who'd been trafficked to pop out, and he'd befriend them. And he interviewed over 100 women. He won their trust, and then printed on the front page of the Sunday People in 1951 a headline that said, "Why are you not arresting these men?" And they could have sued him for libel, but they knew what he'd written was true. Questions were asked in Parliament, and the police went round to nick these guys. So we're outside the Blue Posts in Kingley Street. Now, Duncan Webb, the crime reporter, would buy himself a pint of stout or bitter and sit there until the women he knew had been trafficked would emerge from the brothel, which is just behind us. He was so diligent in his work, and he was also so well trusted by the villains he was writing about, that the famous gangster Billy Hill actually paid him to ghostwrite his story. As soon as the biography came out, Billy Hill actually disappeared with £100,000 worth of gold, which has never been recovered from a robbery in Mayfair. And also, Duncan Webb's impact on British journalism was such that he wrote 4 or 5 books about the art of crime reporting. But when he passed away, all of his notebooks, and he kept them all. I imagine when you're doing this sort of kind of crime reporting, there's such a good chance you'll be sued for libel. So he kept every single notebook he'd ever had, and they were all deposited in the National Archives in Kew. So if you want to go and read firsthand some of Duncan Webb's shorthand, you can actually go down to the archives in Kew and look at his work as a primary source. 4 of the brothers escaped, went abroad, never to be seen again. Actually, one of the things Duncan Webb had done is tracked them through France and through Italy and put together a whole load of evidence which proved they'd falsified their citizenship records when they moved to London, which was another way of getting rid of the Messinis. Anyway, Alfredo, the last Messina brother, was left behind, and his job was to clear up all the business for the brothers and smuggle their ill-gotten gains out of the country. The police got wise. Duncan Webb told had proved that these guys were up to no good. Alfredo was nicked. He got 2 years hard labour and then was deported, and that was the end of the Messina brothers. Duncan Webb, he was an incredible crime reporter. he had the confidence of every crook in the country. Even though they didn't like him, he was attacked. He had people try and stab him. One day he was walking down Regent Street and a car careered onto the pavement and slammed him against the wall. Thankfully he survived, but it was someone from the Jack Spot gang. Jack Spot actually also accosted him in an alleyway just around the corner in 1955 and broke both his arms. Apparently his desk at the Sunday People was surrounded by bulletproof glass. Shows to the degree he upset the mobsters. But his motto as a crime reporter was, I don't tell the police what villains tell me, and I don't tell villains what the police tell me. And it made him an extremely successful and very, very diligent crime reporter. So as we're in Kingley Street, let's raise our hats, raise our tifters to the great Duncan Webb, one of the greatest crime reporters of the 20th century, a bloke who used his talent and his ability as a reporter to make the world a slightly better place. First Korean restaurant in London, this.
Is it?
Yep. It's the best as well.
It's the best?
It's absolutely brilliant. It's been here since the early 60s and it is absolutely amazing.